know me, and you've probably heard Brad tell my story several times. You guys can probably tell it yourselves too. But what you haven't heard is the part that came right before that and the part that came shortly after. So today, that's what I'll give you. When I speak about this, I usually ask if anyone has a life verse or a Bible verse that they consider to be their life verse. And if you're not sure if you have one, I often ask, besides John 3:16, what's the one verse that you can quote from memory? Chances are good that's your life verse. That's the one that you cling to when the world seems to be fraying at the edges. My life verse is Proverbs 16:9. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. That's a really odd choice for a life verse. Honestly, I could think of a couple better ones, like Psalms 23:1, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Or even Psalms 46:1, God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Those sound like life verses. They speak of power and of help. My verse, on the other hand, well, it just reminds you that you can't always have it your way. In case you're wondering, I did not read this verse in my Bible one day and decide that it was a beautiful verse full of promise for my life. Very far from it. My life verse was actually chosen by wise counsel and provided to me at the age of 21 as I lay in a hospital bed wondering if I would be paralyzed and watching my parents war with too many medical decisions to even count, all because I was unable to at the time. Proverbs 16:9. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. I look back now and I can see just how true this verse has played out in my life, and because I believe in the promises of God, I know that it will continue to play out for the rest of the days I walk this earth. Even still, it's a hard life verse and not one I would have chosen for myself. There are parts of my story that may mirror your own, and I hope that if you've not already found peace with those portions of your story, that today I can show you that peace is available and that it is within reach. However, there are also parts of my story that belong only to myself and a very small percentage of the population. But that's not to say that it's not applicable to you. As a dear friend once told me, we may not be able to relate to the rareness of your story, but we can all relate to our life turning out different than we thought it would be. So whatever your story is, I hope that my story will encourage you and show you that it is possible to have it all as long as you change the way you think about having it all. If someone were telling my story, they would probably begin when I was 17 and the Navy had stationed me in Great Lakes. They wouldn't be completely wrong to start there, except that you wouldn't fully understand why my life would seem on track one minute and a roller coaster off the rails the next. So let's begin when I was 16 years old and I had a plan for my life. I had graduated early and had signed up for the Navy, and I was going to follow in my father's footsteps. I had even landed the same job that he had when he was in the military. Life was starting, and by my standards, pretty soon I would have it all. It was simple. I would do my time and let the military train me, and once I was done, I would get a job in building automation just as my father did. Why? Because I was a daddy's girl, and the bond that we shared was a hunger for knowledge. And I wanted to be happy in life, and I wanted a job that I enjoyed and I didn't dread going to every day. I figured that if these things were true of him in the career path that he had chose, then choosing that career path would equal happiness for me. However, I learned some very hard truths about myself once I entered the military. Before exiting boot camp, they call you before a career counselor and they go over all the details of your future job and tell you where you'll be stationed. As I sat in the counselor's office that day, I learned that my recruiters had failed to get a waiver for my ASVAB scores because technically I didn't qualify for the career I chose. I was 3 points short. But for me, so I don't know what you think when you hear 3 points short, but for me, a person that wore their knowledge and academic achievements like an armor, I heard that I wasn't good enough. I heard that I didn't meet the standards I had set for myself. I heard that I was a failure. Now, because the military needs certain amount of women in each position, the career counselor was able to apply for the waiver for my scores, and all I had to do was wait to see if it would come through, and it did come through. So I may not have been 3 points smart enough, but the fact was that because I was a woman and someone had marked me of being as American Indian descent, it outweighed the truth. So I was provided with orders to walk across the street and attend school to be an electronics technician. So for me, I was super relieved because my path was still intact. I would still be able to have it all. The classes for my career were self-paced, and I took advantage of it. I graduated from my school faster than anyone else in my cohort. According to our instructor, I almost managed to set a record for how fast I had completed the course. I was grouped with a different cohort and began my second school. A few weeks in, my pace began to slow and I began to struggle with the lessons. I didn't ask for help. I didn't want anyone else to know the truth. I was 3 points underqualified for that job. I was a failure. I carried that with me night and day. It consumed me and I let it become my truth. And I sunk into a depression. I didn't talk about it to anyone. I didn't ask for help. Instead, I became a shell of the person I once was. I was 17 and I was surrounded by people I never wanted for love. But that morning, as I sat at my desk in a room with a bottle of pain pills, I was alone. I didn't think of anyone else. I didn't think about the parents that would warn me every day, the brother that would grow up in the shadow of my selfish act, or the family that adored me, the friends that enjoyed my company. As I swallowed each pill that morning, I only thought about how I was 3 points underqualified and that as soon as someone found out, my path would be barred. As I crawled up into my bunk and I laid there crying, I only thought about how I would never have it all. When I failed to report to duty that day, it was the guard's responsibility to come and find me. The guard who was on duty happened to be one of my roommates, and as they found me in my bunk sweating, they just figured I was sick, so they covered for me and just left me be. Eventually, I would give up on dying, and I would vomit what I could up. I would make a tear-choked phone call that day to a friend who would call a group of our friends who would see me through the day in a phone conversation with my mother. There are a lot of details that I don't remember from the next few days and the weeks that followed. I do remember being checked out in the ER and being admitted into the hospital psychiatric ward. I remember them taking the strings out of my hoodie and the laces from my tennis shoes. I remember meeting with multiple doctors to assess my current state of mind. I don't remember what was said. But after 3 days, I was told to return to school. I remember meeting with a psychologist afterwards for a few sessions where we discussed different coping strategies, like not reading in bed and allowing my body to get a good night's sleep. I'm not sure who decided that was a good night's sleep was a way to cope with the shame of trying to end one's life or being 3 points underqualified for your career, but that's the prescription I was given. My depression didn't end. It didn't go to another corner of my mind. It stayed front and center. And as I walked around in a daze, just trying to make it through each day, that daze is probably the reason I don't remember being told that the military was bringing charges against me and that I was doing court to answer for the attempt on my own life. I was 17 the day that 2 military police showed up to pull me out of class and escort me to court. I was 17, standing alone in the middle of a courtroom without counsel when I was informed that I no longer deserved the rank I wore and I was punished to 30 or 60 days labor for my crime. I was just 17 the first time that the plans I had made for myself fell apart around me. As I stood there that day, I heard that not only was I 3 points underqualified for the career I had chosen, but that I should be ashamed of the fact that I suffered from depression and had called out for help the only way I knew how. So that day in the courtroom, when the base commander told me that he didn't think I belonged in his military, I agreed and I signed away the rights to my career, my free college, and my signing bonus. I was pulled out of school that day and transferred into a different unit on the opposite side of base. I would serve out my sentence of labor, which included picking up trash around the base while wearing no rank and a green badge that told others I was being punished. I served my punishment until my discharge papers were approved, at which point the military gave me a one-way ticket home. My parents knew what I had been through, but they didn't share it with anyone. It was my story to tell, and I chose not to tell it. For years afterwards, I would carry the guilt and the shame around with me. According to my standards, I was a failure, and I wouldn't allow myself to forget it. After returning home, I tried to find a new path, but I couldn't let go of the fact that my original plan had failed. So when the opportunity arose for me to work at the same company as my father, I took it. I took a job in the accounting department during the day, and at night I attempted to put myself through technical school for a degree in electronics. With enough hard work, I could still have it all. The odd thing is that I love numbers, and my no-nonsense attitude made me really good at accounting. And so I kind of found a niche for myself that I didn't even know was a thing. And even though I was really good at it, it wasn't the original plan, and so I still tried to go for the original plan. And around this time is when I met Brad. So I was 20, so 14 years ago, I met him. My parents were going to the church that he pastored. And my mom she just doesn't give up on anything. And she bugged me, because at the time I was living with them, and she bothered me to meet with their pastor, and I kept telling her no. And finally she said, if you'll just meet with him, just one meeting, I won't bother you about it anymore. And I was like, score, we have a deal. I'll meet him. When can you meet me? And so she set up a meeting. It was one night when I had plans, so I went there before going to hang out with some friends. And when Brad tells you that I was a punk kid, he's not lying. I did come in there. It was very obvious that I didn't want to be there, and I did not have that I had already had it set in my mind that what he had to say had no bearing on my life whatsoever. So we sat down, and the whole time he talked, I did sit there with my arms crossed. And props to him, because when I'm already a sarcastic person, but when I'm in a place where I don't want to be, I just turn it up to the nth degree. So I don't even know how he dealt with me that night. But he did. He got through the gospel. He gave me the good news and the bad news. And he's like, well, what do you think? And I was like, I don't think anything. I don't believe this. And I remember, instead of just stopping there, he asked me, he said, well, what do you have to lose? And I didn't really understand the question, and so he phrased it this way. He said, so say that he goes, do you believe by the standards that are set in the Bible that you're a sinner and those sins would send you to hell? I was like, of course, by those standards, yes, that's what would happen if the Bible were true. And he said, do you think that it's possible that a man named Jesus walked this earth? And I was like, well, I mean, I can't really refute that. I mean, there's other parts of history besides the Bible that speak to that. And he said, so what if you just took a leap of faith and you believed the Bible for what it is, and God could show you, that it's true? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, what if you took a leap of faith and you said you believed in God and his promises? He said, if you walked out of here and you died, if you believed and there was a God, then you win, you go to heaven. And if you died and you believed but there wasn't a God, you still win. Like, you can't lose either way. And that was logic that I honestly couldn't get around. And so I did that. I took a leap of faith, and I believed that if the Bible was true, and that God was who he said he was, that, he would show up. And I kind of equate it to when you get a new car. Like, you don't see that car everywhere until you own that car. And then it's everywhere. It's all you can see. That's how God was for me. As soon as I got saved, I could see God everywhere and everything, and he constantly reminded me that he was there. Proverbs 16:9. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. It was May 1st, 2008, and I was 21 the second time the plans I had made for myself fell apart around me. My whole body hurt, not a soreness, but an intense fire that burned on the end of every nerve. I couldn't bear for my clothing to come in contact with my body. I couldn't bear to touch myself, and slowly I was losing control of the lower half of my body. That's what it felt like for me the first of many days that my body would wage war upon itself. The first hospital I went to that day would inform me that they didn't know what was wrong with me, but that whatever it was definitely out of their league. The second hospital I went to that day would tell me that I needed brain surgery and to return 3 days later. Their busy hospital system would also forget that the lower portion of my body wasn't working and I would be released still suffering with no answers. It would be the third hospital that I visited the following day that would provide relief, and a team of doctors who worked around the clock for a week only to provide me with a best guess as to why my body decided to attack itself. But during that week, I saw God work in ways that still amaze me to this day. This is the week that my life verse would be chosen by wise counsel and explained to me. And just a side note, Brad is the wise counsel. It also is the week that I would begin to heal from the guilt and shame that I had carried around with me ever since the day I attempted to take my own life. My body was attacking itself, and a top-notch neurosurgeon was called in to consult on my case. My spinal fluid was leaking out of my spine, and it was causing my spinal cord to swell. It was determined that my brain was too large to fit inside my skull, and since it didn't have enough room, it was pushing down on my spine, causing the fluid to push out. It's funny what you cling to in times of distress, because while my parents heard that their daughter would have to have brain surgery, I only heard that my brain was too large to fit inside my skull. And in that moment, I slowly began to put back on my armor and told myself that the military was wrong about me. I mean, really, how can you be 3 points underqualified with a brain that large? I received a visit from the neurosurgeon that was supposed to be operating on me later that day. He informed my parents that he had prayed about the surgery and something told him not to operate. Instead, he decided to try a course of steroids for 3 days. The swelling in my spine went down, and as it did, I regained feeling in my lower extremities. I left the hospital with a possible diagnosis of transverse myelitis caused by a syrinx. And I was told chances were I would live my life without it ever affecting me again. One last time I would see the neurosurgeon that saved my life, and one more time he would provide an opening for healing without knowing it. In our last conversation during a follow-up appointment, this neurosurgeon would mention that if I had still been in the Navy at the time my body had attacked itself, I would have died because the majority of neurologists and neurosurgeons would have thought brain surgery was the answer. I returned to work after being released from the hospital, and I thought my life would go back to normal. In my wildest of dreams, I could not have ever imagined how the next 4 years would play out. Here's the super quick version. My case was transferred to a local neurologist so that someone could keep tabs on me. Some of my symptoms returned, and being unsure of my diagnosis, the neurologist refers me to the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. There, I'm diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, and I began to give myself shots each day as treatment. After months of treatment, my optic nerve begins to swell, and I temporarily lose the vision in one of my eyes. Several courses of steroids later, when I'm battling fatigue on a daily basis and I can't always control my limbs, it's decided that on top of the shots, I will undergo several months of chemotherapy known as Cytoxan. My family and I would seek a second opinion from UT Southwest, and a multiple sclerosis doctor would diagnose me with Devick's neuromyelitis optica. I will be told that the outlook for my disease isn't good. The majority of patients are either paralyzed, blind, or both within 5 years. It's decided then that I'll stop giving myself shots daily since I don't have MS, but I'll continue the chemotherapy. 6 months will pass before it will be decided that the Cytoxan isn't providing enough stability. The doctors will come up with a new game plan. I'll do a different form of chemotherapy known as Rituxan, and instead of getting it monthly, I'll do it every 3 months. A year will pass, and doctors will decide that although the new chemo is providing stability, the length of stability isn't what they had hoped. I'll be switched to a pill form of chemo known as Cellcept, and I'll be taking it daily. In the mix of all these different treatment plans, I will lose my job and I will go on disability. It is at this point that I will realize I will never achieve the career that I had planned for myself at the age of 16. I will look into radical courses of treatment, and I will decide that they're not for me. I will discontinue the daily pill form of chemo, and I will spend 6 months visiting an infusion chair every 2 weeks, getting pumped full of Rituxan once again. A doctor that specializes in my disease will relocate to Texas, and I will fight for the right to be treated by him. During all of these different treatments and different doctors, I will have many hospital stays. I will undergo strange treatments, and during one of these, a procedure will go wrong, and a doctor will unknowingly nick my lung, causing it to collapse. I will undergo emergency bedside surgery to inflate my lung. I will have multiple hospital stays because of the antibiotics that I have to take will cause me harm while keeping my blood cells from attacking me. Eventually, the treatments will stabilize me, and I will live in a new phase of normal. The hospital stays will be less frequent. Chemo becomes something I look forward to, and the thought that without a cure, my disease will slowly progress doesn't invade my every thought. When I first got sick, I was angry, and I wanted to ask God why. Why did He allow my own blood cells, the blood cells that He formed, to attack me? I don't ask Him why, though, because deep down I know that knowing the reason why won't change the reality of my situation. I know that it's not my place to know why, but it is my responsibility to walk the path that He sets before me, even when the terrain and the surrounding landscape are not what I have in mind. So what's the difference between being told that you're 3 points underqualified and that you have a rare disease that will blind and paralyze you for which no cure exists? Both of these things change the landscape of my life. So why would one throw me into a downward spiral while the other was just something I accepted? The answer is servanthood. The first time that the plans I had laid for myself didn't work out, I was unsaved. Between that time and the second time the plans I had for myself didn't work out, I had not only accepted Christ as my personal Savior, but I was in the Word daily. The difference was that the second time around, I understood that God does give us all. It just may look different than what we had in mind, and the timeline is His, not ours. And B, no matter if we think we have a little or all of it, in the end, it all belongs to Him. In his book, Improving Your Serve, Charles Swindoll compares servanthood to buying the pearl of great price, and the illustration that he uses is one of my favorites. To summarize it, a shopkeeper has this really beautiful pearl, and a guy comes in and asks him how much it is, and the shopkeeper says it's really expensive. And the guy says, well, do you think that I could afford it? And the shopkeeper says, oh yeah, everyone can afford it. And the guy says, okay, well, what does it cost? And the shopkeeper pulls out a piece of paper and he says, well, let's write down what you have. We'll keep a tally and see. And so the guy tells him how much money he has in the bank, and the shopkeeper writes it down. He says, okay, what else do you have? And he searches in his wallet and he comes up with some other funds. And so they add that to the list. And the shopkeeper just looks at him like, is there more? And the guy's like, I don't know what more you want. And he jokingly says, do you want my house? And the shopkeeper's like, okay, yeah, that's a good start. He's like, what else? And the guy's like, I got a camper and 2 cars. So he's like, he adds those to the list. Like, we'll take those. And the guy's like, dude, you've left me with nothing. I just have, I have no place to live. And he's like, so are you alone in this world? And the guy says, well, no, I have a wife and 2 kids. And so the shopkeeper adds those to the list. And the guy's like, you're crazy. You've literally left me with nothing if that's what I have to give for this pearl. And the shopkeeper says, I'm sorry, I almost forgot. I have to put you on here too. And then the shopkeeper goes on to say, now listen, I will allow you to use all these things for the time being, but don't forget that they are mine, just as you are. And whenever I need any of them, you must give them up, because now I am the owner. That's what it means to come to terms with servanthood, having it all, but realizing that God is the author of our stories, and so He's the one that determines what having it all looks like, and He can add to it or take away from it at any moment. We're entrusted with these lives, and it's our responsibility to put one foot in front of the other and to continue walking down the path that God points out, even when the path is rockier than what we had in mind, even when the surrounding landscape isn't what we pictured, even when the path is in a totally different direction than we had planned. Proverbs 16:9. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps.
Amen. Amen. Wow.